Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed your lunch today. We're moving on with our second panel, which is titled Data Protection and Security. Our moderator is Prateek Agrawal, who is the head of Global Business Continuity Management, and he will introduce the rest of the panelists.
All right, thank you. So this session is about data protection and security. In some ways, it's about the DNA. And as the four of us came together, thinking about how we position this, what was fascinating is within the first few seconds, the ideas and thoughts all started coming together. For me personally, when you think about business continuity, you don't really think about data as the natural way of thinking. For us, the wake-up call was Sony. When Sony happened, we really needed to think about how we not just have a backup, but a backup of the backup. And as we go through the panel, we'll start talking about threats, risks, solutions, challenges, way forward, and techniques. With that, I'll have the panel introduce themselves. So, Anju.
Hi, I'm Anju Chopra. I'm Senior Vice President of Cyber Technologies at Kroll. And Kroll is the leading provider of risk mitigation, deep and dark web monitoring. And to top that, we have the finest of the finest for investigations.
Hi guys, Prashil Kumar. I'm the head of IT operations and infrastructure at Fiji Airways. So Fiji Airways is the national airline of Fiji. And just that Fiji is a country and not a brand. And just in my role, I'm in charge of level 1, level 2, level 3 IT support services, data center services, network operations. And part of my role is also cybersecurity. Prior to this, I was with financial organizations, automotive such as Toyota and Hyundai, and yeah, thanks.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Bonds. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of the Ping Identity's PingIntelligence business unit. So I've been in this space for a long time. Ping Identity, if you don't know Ping, is big into the identity access management world as well as data and API security. So looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
I'm John Shegerian, the co-founder of ERI. I'm also the executive chairman of ERI. ERI is the world's largest hardware data destruction company. So if you think of Shred-it and Iron Mountain being the leading brands in paper destruction, we're the world's largest brand in hardware destruction.
So guys, a very, very diverse panel. Banks, airline, data destruction, and 2 other companies that are providing excellent services to the industry. So with that, guys, I'll start off with what keeps you awake? What are the threats and sources of risk that you see for data from your different perspectives? So Jason, I'll start with you.
All right, picking on me. That's fine. So for me, I spend a lot of time, Ping spends a lot of time in the enterprise, and what I see on a daily basis is just the lack of funding and kind of forward thinking around security. I think everybody thinks it's not going to happen to me, or if it does, it won't be as bad as some people have made it out to be. And for me, it's just the lack of support for it I see in organizations, and kind of like a lot of the reactive modes that people have to get into around these things instead of being proactive and kind of setting things and standards and practices that really, we have diversity programs and other things in HR, but we really don't have really great security programs and, specific to data protection. There's just, you've got silos of people within organizations, but it's not part of the DNA of a company like a diversity program might be, right? So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, Prashil. Prashil?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I was too absorbed.
I wowed him. I really had him wowed with that answer.
It took me away, man. So yeah, for me, it's more around a lot of focus on technology, just one aspect of cybersecurity protection. I feel there's more should be around people and process. So as we all know, the weakest link is around people. But most of the time, companies not ready to invest into awareness sessions. Just keeping the process side of things working, in terms of any sort of projects has really defined roles. Who are the data owners? Who are the system owners? It's not a proper firewall. Just not a proper firewall will do the job. It's more than firewall. It's more than just technology, which needs to drive things.
John, from your perspective.
I'll sum it up in 2 words: Jeff Bezos. If the wealthiest guy in the world can't protect his data, there's nobody in this room that should feel like I've got it. For if you work for a company or a government entity or even your own, no one's got it. We're at the top of the first inning in the cybersecurity, data protection baseball game. And if anyone thinks they've got it, typically those are the people who are calling me a week later, a month later, sometimes 3 years later after they nicely told me they've got it and shown me the door, and then they tell me they don't have it, and how can we now get on top of it? So I think there's a long way to go, and I think the risks out there are massive, and the laws around this area are only growing.
Sure, and Anju?
So what keeps me awake? Sometimes I think that I don't even get to sleep. So forget about being awake or not, or like, so. For me, the biggest concern that I see is security by design is not inherent in our product development. It is an offshoot of when we are done, because we are so worried about speed to market, we have to get this product going. And then this is the after effect of, oops, we were supposed to be thinking about security, and that should have been in the forefront of our development process.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you guys all talked about, you talked about people, you talked about security by design. John, you talked about the Bezos situation, the data proliferation, and how we're dealing with it. As you think about today's space, are there things that come to your mind when you think about the third-party space, the vendors, the APIs, the microservices? Are they throwing in additional quirks as you think about this world?
Oh my God, glad you asked about that. So it's very interesting. Previously, I would have just said, oh, we are doing the due diligences on the vendors. So we have done our work and everything is great. And as we go ahead and take our service monitoring to these big companies and Fortune 50 and the government, and we do the scan on the deep and dark web, the first thing we see is most of the data breaches are coming from the vendors. How do you control that? So those are some of the issues that we have seen time and time again. You are saying that the vendors, we are in a global landscape right now. So, and most of our back-end work is in different country or in different offices. Somebody's handling our HR, somebody's handling our technology. How do we go ahead and make sure that they are not the ones disclosing our information? We might be protecting ourselves behind those four walls of our firewall, so-called, and those are some of the concerns. And Prashil, I just wanted to see as to how do you go ahead and keep that data safe for all your data operations for your fleet?
Yeah, interesting you asked it. I had one very good experience to share. Is in my previous company when we implemented multi-factor for just for third parties, and so many came back saying that they cannot log in. And when we actually checked, they were using credentials of people who had actually left the company. So it was an eye-opener for us, because then we're like, these are our trusted people. We look upon them for support. We look upon them for project management and all. But they're just not reliable in terms of security. So for airline, it's even more challenging, because you don't have one silver bullet in terms of applications. There's operational controls, there's engineering, there's flight data. So in this case, you're dealing with multiple vendors. So yeah, the challenge is for real.
Jason?
Well, yeah, and I think one of the things that a lot of people don't think about is the fact that a lot of the data breaches that we have happened aren't from external bad actors. I kind of jokingly say those guys in the dark room with the hoodies and the monitors, flipping around. It's not those guys. It's misuses and abuses by actually valid actors that have access to data via typically APIs these days. And they're coming with a valid OAuth token with valid scopes, and they just misuse and abuse it, right? I think the Facebook example from last year is a perfect example with the partner up in Cambridge Analytics, and they had valid access and actually more access than they really needed, and they said, hey, well, I have this data, I can do more with it, right? And so those types of things, those aren't the people we're looking for typically, right? We're all looking for the dark hoodie guy, and nobody's really protecting and making sure what's actually happening with the good actors is proper and right. So that's another area, whether it's because you're using a service in the cloud or you've got your data inside your own environment, that you need to make sure that you're protecting along with whatever it is that the vendor's doing, if you're using a third-party vendor, to make sure that the people that have the access have the right access, and you start to get into privilege access and fine grain and all that stuff. But again, that kind of goes back to my original point. It takes time and effort to do this, and you've got to plan and have really thought into what people have access to, and not just you can query star.star kind of thing. And so I think this is where it needs to be up front. It needs to be kind of layers of thought. You can't just have the data people protecting the data. You've got to have the people that have access to all the data. You got to have a conversation with them and who's going to do what, and make sure that everybody's got a proper scope of the true exposure area, if you will.
John?
Comparatively speaking, the hardware side of this is much more the Wild West right now and in early stages compared to the software side of this. And I'll share an example with you. About 4 years ago, I got a phone call from Homeland Security, the FBI Division of Homeland Security, who wanted to come meet with me the next day in my office. And this gentleman came. He was a member of both Homeland Security and FBI. And he shared with me this cautionary tale. He had asked us to help him look after and send him any leads on who the irrational players in the industry were. And what I mean by that is we can go and give a quote to a corporation or a governmental entity for destroying their hardware and therefore their data. Many times people say, well, they want to save money. So they use a scrapyard, a recycling company, a data destruction company who picks up their hardware for free. And what this FBI agent shared with me is that the United States and the entities within the United States were facing a crisis of massive proportion in the coming years. And I said, why was that? And he said to me, John, the people who were the irrational players years ago would pick up this material, hardware, for free and ship it to Africa, India, even more likely China, to recover the precious metals out of the hardware: copper, gold, silver, palladium. He said, now the irrational players are picking up our old assets for free or very cheap, and they're shipping it to the highest bidders, who are now people who are adverse to our homeland security interests and also our corporate best practices and interests. So when there's breaches that happen, and as was mentioned earlier, the Sony, and there's been hundreds in the media since, Target, Home Depot, Facebook, the list is massive. And they first blame Russia, then they blame China, and somehow we always end up on North Korea. That's not the way it always goes. Many times it's ISIS, the Taliban, and others who are adverse to our homeland security interests. And therein lies the problem with using bad vendors in the hardware space, irrational vendors, vendors who don't have certifications or licenses to destroy your hardware responsibly and appropriately in a domestic setting. So that's really what's happening in the United States right now on the hardware side.
Now, it's a scary thought when you think about the example you talked about. It scares me to think about the data, where it goes, how it's used, what happens to it. And if you think about you all as a customer, at the end of the day, your shrink wrapping trust is what you're providing to the banks, the other institutions, and you expect that to be protected. As I talked about earlier, our journey started off, the wake-up call in some ways was Sony, but to your point, there have been numerous events and crises, whether it was different banks, clients, strategic partners, you name it. It would start all over the place. And then part of our biggest challenge was, If we didn't process the money, our worry was the markets don't open tomorrow because of the amount of money that goes through the pipeline and supporting 98 countries where the bank has an operation. And we started on a journey where we said, it's good to have the backup. Again, we'll have the backup of the backup, but then how do you protect that backup? How do you make it a mutable copy of that data? How do you bring it back quickly enough so that the customer confidence is not lost? The last thing you want to worry about is the lines outside of the bank. And if the news is out there for just one day, you don't worry about it. If the news is out there for 5 days, 10 days, headline every day, that's when you start worrying about, oh, this is a much bigger problem. So with that, let me turn into some solutions. What are some of the practices that you all have seen that have helped drive some level of data protection and security in the organizations that you've dealt with? Anju, we'll start with you.
So I think, let me give you an example of that. For us, it was a paradigm shift. So for us, as a leadership, we had to make a decision whether we are okay with the legacy systems or we want more fluid and secure systems and secure data. So it's a heavy lift, and in the end, the leadership made a decision that, yes, this is how we wanted to move forward. And for us, collaboration between all the different siloed groups as to how to keep the data secure became critical. Not only from product to DevOps to technology and to legal from compliance aspect, we all had to come together in a collaborated manner, and in including that if you were going on to the cloud, as to how do we go ahead and keep the InfoSec as our prime key holder to make sure that how we are going to go ahead and have our APIs secured, have our cert manager in place, how do we encrypt our data, and on top of that, what Jason actually mentioned is very, very critical on the APIs, because there are so many APIs coming. If you're not auditing and logging that data, you would never know what the anomalies are. So you first have to authenticate before you authorize anybody to touch my data. So for us as a leadership within our Kroll group, for making this change and making this a more fluid environment and getting the collaboration was very critical for us. Prashil?
Great. Prashil, how do you ensure that your customers continue to fly?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. So what we've trying to achieve is headed towards a proper data management strategy and supported by a good data management a process and a program. So in line, it was important for us to identify what we want to protect. So for an airline, we're talking about corporate data, which comprises customer data, PIIs and all, and then there's operational data. So the shift has been from traditional aircrafts to next generation aircrafts. So these next generation aircraft, they're actually intelligent aircrafts, which has the capability for communicating with ground IT infrastructure. Now, what happens is, just go briefly on that, is what happens is as soon as the aircraft lands, it's able to transfer a lot of logs and a lot of checks about the aircraft, which is about its health. It's about the QIA data. So previously, the traditional aircrafts would be, one of the engineers would go and plug in maybe a CD or a USB and get the data off. Now it's all over TCP/IP. So just that data which actually creates a lot of operational efficiency, and then on the other side there's corporate data which has customer data, customer credit card, protecting it and just identifying data classification for a start, identifying what you want to protect, what you want to achieve out of that protection. So a proper data management strategy gave us a holistic view of the steps we need to take.
Is there a certain level of buy-in you needed to obtain? It's an important topic you raise on data management strategy. So what did you have to go through to get the buy-in at the right levels to ensure that it gets embedded versus just a conversation?
Yeah. Well, it takes a lot of effort. You need to identify first of all, what you want to protect, and once you have done or applied all the strategies, where you stand after a year or so. And then obviously the airline model keeps on changing. There's a lot of competition out in the market. You need to revisit that model and relook at it over and over. So yeah, it takes the support of board, it takes support of senior management to drive that sort of scale.
Leadership plays a key role.
Leadership plays a key role.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
correct.
Thank you, John. Your perspective?
2 points that all of you have made that are, I think, so on point. One, the holistic approach. One, the software approach closes the front door.
Yep.
We close the back door. Two, the buy-in is critical. So many who are very, very smart folks who are just not familiar with all the risks that are out there and still coming. Sometimes it takes an accident, a mistake, to get everybody on the same page, to get the buy-in to happen. One that doesn't make the cover of the NYT or the WSG,
Yep.
but one that's internal. It galvanizes the troops, the buy-in happens, and then the holistic approach can take effect. That's been our experience over the last 15 years, and that continues to evolve that way.
Yeah, collaboration is really key over here. So if you're not going to be tight among the leadership and the different
Right.
groups, it's never going to work.
Right.
Jason?
Yeah, no, I did agree with everybody here, and I'd say that just doing the simple things, right? Whether it's getting buy-in across the organization, like we've been talking about, the Landmark White. For those of you who know Australia, there's a company over there that does business with all the banks related to mortgages. They literally published an API that had zero security. Anybody you and I could have all written an interface and accessed that data, right? Now, the data itself is probably all data that somebody could find out about anybody in this room on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn about any of all of us. It wasn't the deep financial information related to getting their mortgages and stuff that was exposed. It was kind of first name, last name, email address, phone number. But that caused a huge problem. So that was the shakeup over there. And I just got back last month from a trip. And now every executive over there is like, what just happened? Because like the 6 major banks all pulled the usage of that service. The ASX, which is their version of like the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange, shut down trading of their product. It lost at one point, I think it was like 26% of its market cap. The CEO got fired. And now they're finally just starting to recover. And that was like 3-4 months ago. That now some of the banks are now starting to use their services again, and they're going to probably end up laying off. They said probably 30 to 40% of their staff because they're just not going to be able to recover for quite some time, right? And so it takes things like just simply putting an API gateway in place that's going to actually validate an OAuth token from somebody to make sure that that's the proper person that should have access to your data, right? Or multi-factor, a very true story. I was at a coffee company out in Seattle a few years ago, talking to them about implementing multi-factor into their application for anything that they were doing related to a financial transactions, reloading a card, transferring from one card to another. And about an hour and 30 minutes into the meeting, a bunch of people's phones went off and they had to leave the meeting because they had just been attacked because somebody was able to impersonate a user and get access, and not just a user, every user, through an invalid bug, and then was able to transfer money, which is moving their data behind the scenes to different cards, right? And so just doing simple things like multi-factor in that case would have not allowed somebody to impersonate, right? I'd imagine if I took a survey of this room, most people in this room don't use multi-factor with their Facebook. My wife got really annoyed with me when I told her she needed to turn it on, and so did my kids. But just doing those simple things that a lot of people don't want to do personally, and at corporate levels, there's not support for too. It's kind of crazy. So I think if you just start with some of the simple, basic things like getting everybody on board with a process or program, and making sure that multi-factor or everything's secured through a gateway or whatever it might be, that all data at rest that's PII or whatever is encrypted at rest, and those types of things. There's simple things that I think that are just missed. And when you look back at all these different attacks lately, it's not that the bad actors are, these guys are the next, they're going to put somebody on Mars. They're that smart. It's they're just taking advantages of cracks in the dams, right? I mean, yeah, they're finding the holes in the fence, and they're leveraging them. So, like I said, sometimes it's not even a bad actor; it's a good actor. So I think it's a lot of times it's just the simple stuff that gets overlooked because everybody's so busy with everything in their day-to-day work, and these things get missed.
And you have a very valid point. And Prateek, from time to time again, our product We monitor the deep and dark web for government and for Fortune 50 companies and for directly for consumers. From time and time again, we see clear text information on, and I'm sure everybody will chime in into that, on dark web. And for us, we are ingesting pretty much 3 to 6 terabytes of data. For us, it is hypercritical for Homeland Security to index, make sense out of that data, and in a timely manner send an alert back to the 3-letter agency or to the bank or whoever that we are monitoring for. For us to put analytics on top of that, the whole spectrum of AI and machine learning just started helping us a little bit over there. So from our aspect, that this data that we are seeing in all the clear text and PII information and confidential data, for us to go ahead and then start making sense of all of that and to go ahead and start sending alerts in a near real-time manner, we just had to go ahead and, in addition, start using the AI modeling and machine learning to just go ahead and say how fast we want to move forward with that. But overall, we are seeing a lot of data in clear format in the dark web space.
So why does that happen?
As to Jason's point or to Prashil's point or to John's point, sometimes it is malicious and sometimes it is inadvertent. Sometimes you genuinely make a mistake, and sometimes speed to market is of essence, that you just say, forget about API, let me not worry about the authorization and authentication, let me not worry about the multi-factor authentication, and that leads to one thing leads to another. Number 2 is the malicious acts are also happening. It's not that these are not happening. There's a reason why all these credit cards are being sold on a forum, right? And there's a huge financial impact to businesses, to countries, for all the breaches that are happening.
Oh, absolutely, and I can echo the point around the time to market. You guys talked about Facebook as a good example. The reality is, I mean, look at the big companies. One of the things that they're really trying to get their arms around is how do they connect pretty quick through APIs with a series of companies. And by the time you get to a Facebook, you often hear you can't order the water you drink. And hence, you have to accept the service they're getting. And if you want that customer base, you have to go with them. So whether it's Facebook, whether it's WhatsApp, whether you pick any social media platform that has a large base, people are reacting and absorbing that. And unfortunately, that comes with risks.
With risk, exactly.
With risks. Let's shift the topic. We've talked a little bit about the traditional factors. Do you think, and it was touched on very briefly, how does cloud come into play? Does that help? Does that hurt? Go ahead.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say. I mean, I think it's got its pros and its cons, right? I mean, yes, you're taking operational costs out of your infrastructure and focusing more on your business, but now you're trusting that somebody else is taking care of your data and your infrastructure and doing the things that they're doing for the right price compared to what you would do it for internally, so you can focus on your business, right? And I would say your mileage varies, right? Sure, you've got a Salesforce.com who's been around forever, and you've got Amazon now doing a lot of integrated things, and a variety of other great companies, right? Ping, we host some of your data in the cloud for you, and we do a lot of authentication in the cloud, and so we have user information and things like that. And so you have to do the due diligence there. It's actually surprising to me sometimes, and probably many of you in the room are Ping customers, that how many people don't really dig in with us when we say, hey, we're going to do your multi-factor for you, right? Or you're going to use our authentication service in the cloud. And they don't really dig in with us on, where's the data stored, how is it stored, who has access to it, what countries is it stored in. Some people just sign our, SLA, or the thing that their lawyer cares about is if we do have to sue you, where do we sue you, what state, right? Like they don't care about the actual important stuff. And so sometimes, now there's probably some of you in this room that your legal departments have wanted to, shake because we've gotten into all those details and then some that are just not necessary. But I think you really have to understand what it means to have your data, what they're doing with it, how they're being good caretakers of it, right? And the weird thing is a lot of executives, I think they're going to save money by going to the cloud, right? I mean, I would bet that somebody could run some version of like Microsoft CRM a lot cheaper than Ping's running Salesforce.com for, right? Like on-premise old CRMs versus what we pay Salesforce, but there's a trade-off there. But the executives think you're getting it for cheaper, but cheaper doesn't necessarily always work out because then the vendor's got to cut corners or focus on the new cool capability versus securing your data with additional capabilities around whatever those might be, right? So I would say that it's like I said, my first answer, yes, it's both good and bad.
So for me, it's I see it from two aspects because I have my on-prem data that holds more than 2 petabytes of data, and then we also have a cloud system as well. The interesting thing about cloud is that it is faster provisioning and on-demand resources. But that fastness that we bring to the table causes us a little bit of security risk. All those things that I don't see on-prem, I see on the cloud. But at the same time, the flexibility of getting additional resources if we are launching worldwide gives me that kind of a comfort and flexibility to just go ahead and expand. So it comes with its own pros and cons, but I see it from both the aspects. Prashil?
Yeah, it's so most of the airline applications are around SaaS solutions, and if they are not, then I get called in the meetings and they're actually asking for VMs and resources and all. So most of them they just come with the option whether they can host it for you or you host it yourself, but you need so much of CPUs,
Yes.
and they expect you to bargain for
Yep.
CPUs and RAMs and all. But after I've done my discussion, I just asked for 5 minutes and I try to talk to them about their data security. And that's where things go very quiet and silent, because that's when I say, what's your data resiliency approach? What do you think about the authentication factors and all? And those are the answers that's not on the table then. For them, it's I need to go back and check with the technical team, and that doesn't happen, and my VMs don't get released until the answers come to me. So it's a challenge, mainly that most of the thinking, most of the approach is around just a couple of VMs. It's out there. You need resources. Here you go. It's all available. Mm-hmm. But the whole approach around security is not there. The whole approach, the end-to-end thinking of how do we connect, how do we keep things secure, how are you segregated from other customers. So that thinking is right not on the table, and people really don't expect you to ask those questions. They expect you to ask and bargain for RAMs and all. So
yeah, and especially with the country compliances, especially with GDPR coming, it's very interesting that how we have to make sure that our VPCs on Amazon for our Europe customers are going to be in Europe versus our US customers are going to be in US. So a lot of those idiosyncrasies come into the play, and which makes it even more exciting.
Exactly. John, your perspective?
The cloud for us is a new line of business. When we started the company, there was no such thing.
Yeah.
And now we destroy data for our clients. We create solutions that are customized for them. Some have us take their server farms off-premise and destroy them off-premise. Some request us to destroy them on-premise. Some ask us to take them off-premise and destroy them under armed guard. It's a very, very, very new, serious line of opportunity from our perspective, but it's not going away. And, as Andrew said, with GDPR coming, it's only growing. We're at the top of the first inning here.
Yep.
Yeah. And I guess the one other thing I would say is, most of the cloud applications people have access to, right? They can download the data, email, a spreadsheet, and then you immediately lose control. Like email, unless you're doing some level, you're actually filtering through that with a CASB or some other product to look at what's going in and out through email, right? You're not getting full protection. So I think there's a little bit of a false sense that just because my data's in, and I'll pick on Salesforce because everybody knows them, right? It's in Salesforce doesn't mean a rep doesn't export a report or take a screenshot or whatever and then send it via email to whoever, and then it's clear text, wherever it's going. And so you kind of lose control at that level too. So I think people need to think about it. Where does it end up on the hardware? Are we going to do managed devices only can have access to this and do these types of things? And so, there's a lot there that it's just because it goes to the cloud doesn't mean, it's even if the company's protecting it perfectly, let's just say Salesforce is doing that, it's what's happening to the data that then all these people have access to now so readily and easily, right, from anywhere in the world. You've got to think about it. Should I really force them to VPN in first and then put some controls around it or do other things, right? Because it's not just about securing it while it's sitting there. It's securing it, who has access to it. Where are all these holes in the fence and these places where the data can leak, right?
And I'm glad, Jason, you mentioned something for the VPN, because how many of us would really like to get onto the company's VPN and then connect onto what we are doing? We are also used to, we are on this in this conference, and we are all connected on this convene wireless, and nobody wants to go onto our VPN and then connect. So, I mean, this is a basic thing, and this is a sure shot risk factor for a lot of our applications.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, I'll just continue on the sales. I've done business with Salesforce since I was a cast iron system back in the late 90s. They force every employee to VPN to access Salesforce. So they don't access Salesforce from anywhere in the world directly. They force their employees to all VPN into the Salesforce network to then actually access Salesforce in the cloud because they put security controls around it, right? And because they don't want to be the ones that have their Salesforce, be the one that's taken advantage of and be in the news for that, right? So it's that company that's how they're doing it, but yet the majority of the companies that actually access Salesforce don't do that, right? Yeah, we don't do it, and I'm like, we're a security company. I tell our CISO all the time, and again, you know what he tells me though? Way back to our original conversation is it's on the list, right? And it's I can't get to it with what then you go sell more stuff, you and your teams, and then maybe we'll have more money for more resources, kind of thing, right? It's a battle of where's it prioritized on the list.
Where do you draw the line? Yep.
So, Andrew, you talked about GDPR.
Yes, that's my favorite topic right now.
And part of the challenge that I find in my role is it's GDPR plus.
Yes.
And data localization has really built up. If you think from just the United States perspective, there is a series of state bodies that are coming up with their own set of requirements. Started off with New York, on to California, some of the other places, right? And you see the same proliferation internationally.
Yes.
How do we get our arms around the challenge of regulatory proliferation, at the same time the need to do our day-to-day jobs and making sure the data is protected?
Oh, I really need help over there.
Okay.
And I definitely need help over there because for us, you cannot be stretched too thin. I personally cannot do it all. So, but for us, fortunately, within our organization, because they are so well versed with the compliance and regulatory requirements for not only the states, the different countries, our team, our CISO team, will just go ahead and our compliance team and our legal team provides us with all that information so that I clearly dot my I's and cross my T's. So that's the kind of support I need. I cannot do it just by myself. Technology cannot just be responsible.
That's with the interaction with the legal compliance teams all coming together.
It's all coming together.
Right. And does that interface now with the data strategy and the way we think about the data strategy? Because that's a question that's come up in the context of Facebook and architecture and how we approach it.
Well, it does, and just on the regulatory requirements, for an airline, what happens is if you don't meet the requirements, you really don't fly. Your aircrafts are grounded. So that actually brought a lot of support and gets a lot of support from the leadership team because there's no two ways about it.
Sure.
Even though the initial thoughts around is we are in Fiji, who's going to come and audit us, right? But that doesn't happen anymore because now you're talking about the business operational at a halt. So a lot of support in terms of that, but then just meeting those requirements and keeping up to date with it is a real challenge. More on these skill sets out in Fiji and out in the globe. So.
Sure.
And that's why we have decided, Prateek, that this panel will be actually going to Fiji for the next conference. So, yes.
We'll let you guys
on Fiji Airways, yes. We're all going over there.
There we go. Do a live stream from there.
John, your perspective?
Well, GDPR is alive and well with the fines that have already been levied and become very public. And typical to the American way, we always want to do things better, bigger. So Wyden and Senators Wyden and Rubio have already put in national legislation. And as you said, Prateek, the states are now going to do their own versions because they want to do it better than the federal.
Right.
You have that concurrently happening with also another massive trend, the liberalization of the judicial system and consideration of the small person and allowing them to bring lawsuits on behalf of new standards that they're creating via precedent with regards to how data is handled by governments and more especially by corporations. So it used to be they could bring a lawsuit if there's been a breach. Now, if they could prove that there's been a misappropriation of their data or a mishandling it, even if a breach hasn't happened, the judiciary is allowing lawsuits to be brought, class action lawsuits by the American public against corporations. That becomes a very tough standard. And they're opening the door for more lawsuits to come. So besides federal fines and state fines, corporations and other entities now have to worry about also their clients bringing pressure, legal pressure and also financial pressure against them. This is only going to grow. And this goes to a story. I was with the largest cybersecurity insurance company in the world at the end of December. And he was explaining who his clients are. Top Fortune 100, Fortune 1000, he handles most of them. And he said there's one thing the C-suite is asking him with regards to cyber insurance. More. Everybody is so concerned about what's going on and the risks that are out there with regards to data. They want to get more insurance in this space with regards to each incident and things of that such. So that's a general barometer of where we're headed here.
I think it's well said. And guys, the reality is that's the fundamental question, that we need to ensure the visibility of the risks, the approaches. You talked about the data strategy, how the regulations are impacting the challenges around us. When you look at the newer technologies, whether it's cloud, the APIs, the microservices, how we're using them, how it all comes together. And it's important for us to raise the game so that there is top-level support at the top of the house, because at the end of the day, it's about the customer. It's about you and I.
Right.
It's about making sure that we continue to get the service and we're not surprised in the press ourselves. So with that, guys, I will pause and open it up for questions.
Okay.
So we have 10 minutes for question and answers.
I am one.
Oh,
All right, there we go.
Yeah, my question is related to GDPR and the balance that we have to have, because as citizens and as individuals, let's face it, we have no privacy. So I agree that the many regulatory bodies at the state level is going to be confusing and more work for everybody, and it will bring frivolous lawsuits. But then also as an industry, I think we need to do something to protect our privacy. So do you guys have any suggestions, recommendations?
So to your question, I feel that privacy is everybody's responsibility, right? It's not just for the technology team to be cautious about how to keep the data secure and what needs to be private, what not needs to be private. It's all of our responsibility. And I have seen time and time again that the weakest link in privacy issues and the weakest link in the data protection issue is always the human factor. And the more training we give and the more awareness we have, the more collaboration we have,
makes it much more beneficial for the entire organization. I should not be sitting back and saying, it's got nothing to do with me. It is, InfoSec's responsibility, or if it's compliance responsibility. No, it is my responsibility. This is my company. How do I keep the data secure?
So I think the thing I would add to that thought, for us, is really started off with knowing what data do we really care about.
Yes.
There is proliferation of data. And there are certain types of data that are important, but in the scheme of things, when you take a customer view, they're not that important.
Yeah.
That's operational company data. So what are the topmost things that you need to protect, whether that's internal, within the Fort Knox walls of the company, or outside?
Exactly.
And then you follow the data controls, irrespective of whether it's at rest, in transit, and or destruction. So if you have that methodology and you follow that data lineage, it gets you to a point. But if you try to protect all, when everything is important, what I've learned is nothing is important.
Nothing is important, yeah. Very well said, very well
Right.
said.
Yeah. I think there's a question there.
I'm actually the privacy director from my company, so I just wanted to add on to the points that you just mentioned. To your point, how is it that that the company can responsibly address the topic of privacy? Really, pretty much relates to exactly what customer base you have. So sometimes it could just be GDPR that's relevant to you, but I doubt it. In today's world, it's going to be GDPR, it's going to be CCPA, which is going to be becoming valid in January 2020. It could be LGPD, which is Portugal and Brazil, if you're like the Googles and the Facebook. And it could be a whole set of breach notification plans, 50 statewide in the United States. So in the end of the day, you're going to have, depending on how large your company is and the complexity of the geography base, you have to have someone that is pretty well versed in privacy, that understands your total geographical and industry and customer base, and pulls in the relevant privacy factors and gives you a comprehensive enterprise-wide outlook on what your privacy regulations or obligations are as a firm, if that makes sense. And sometimes it could be just policy and governance, sometimes it's technology, and sometimes it's just, there are low-hanging fruit that you can address that are easily accessible externally from where your DPAs and auditors are, like updating your privacy policies and your cookie notices. They're easy things that you can address externally. And then there are some that are going to be heavy lift, like doing data identification, exactly where your data subject data resides. Is it just in the data centers? Is it in public and private hybrid clouds? Identifying where all your sets of personal data reside and how to go about securing that using policy, documentation, and technology tools is also something that you should consider. But I think in the end of the day, making sure that you have someone that understands what privacy is all about.
Yeah, and interesting
It's
you
critical.
say that. We have seen a huge influx in our business for breach notification right now, because as different states are asking for this help, and with our business, that what we do is that we also do the breach notification for different clients, and they're all global. Just for example, the Marriott breach. So for that, it was not just confined to United States or to Europe, it was worldwide. And they're looking for the organizations to just go ahead and do the breach notification and awareness of all of those things. And there's an influx of demand over there right now.
And the thing is, if you are a global company, just take the most stringent.
Exactly.
And you're safe.
Well,
Then you're safe, because you have at least set the ground rules over there. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Then you think you're safe.
That's what I was going to actually, when we were,
Yeah.
the last question we had as a panel, I was going to say, I think companies like a Netflix or a few of the others that are kind of going to this, you look at everybody as the same, and you kind of go with, if you will, lowest common denominator, maybe it's the highest common denominator is a better way of saying it, right? But, and if you just defend the worst case scenario or the most difficult regulation implementations and protect the data in that way, or deal with breach notifications in the way of that, then you've, at least you're simplifying. If you're trying to go, piecemealing these things through, then you end up with all these one-offs that you can't manage, right? And so I think, we're seeing a lot of the customers when it comes to like authenticating a user. It doesn't matter if it's an employee, a third-party partner, a B2B or B2C kind of partner. Authenticate them all the same. And if you can trust, with a high degree of certainty that authentication is that person, then do that for everybody. Like, why have a different way to authenticate an employee using like Active Directory in the old days, or now ADFS or whatever, and then have a separate way for different silos of customers? Do it the same way. Do it once well, really well, and you'll be better off, right, in the long run. So we've been trying to tell people simplification of some of that stuff, kind of standardize on a platform, and don't break out users just to break out users. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So you're just complicating things you don't have to complicate. So you're seeing companies go to that now. So.
Great point, Jason.
Hi, my name is Akhilesh. I'm from Adventist Health, and one question one question you had briefly touched on was on Cambridge Analytica incident that happened with Facebook. Them being a third-party managed services company, microservices company. As we all know, like even my company, we all work with managed services companies and microservices out there. How do we vet out those companies and ensure that data breach doesn't happen? Because we funnel our data through them, and how do we vet out those companies and make sure that something like that does not happen, whether it be intentional or unintentional, like breach of data?
It's a great question. I think it just comes down to resources. I'm the one that brought it up, right, the Facebook thing, and I was bringing it more because they were actually a good actor in the eyes of the Facebook API, right? But I think it actually comes down to slowing down, right? In the case of Facebook, they want more people accessing the data because that's what they sell, right? And so, sometimes it just comes down to a little more due diligence. And then, it's, the conference here's got AI, right? So we're talking about using things to show, so we have a product called PingIntelligence for APIs. And it models API traffic, right, for kind of good versus anomalous, right, to just generalize it for people, what's inside the goalpost and what's outside the goalpost, right? And just leveraging other tools like that will help you maybe not stop them before you ever sign them up as a partner, but maybe you'll start to notice, some bad behavior, right? We had a customer, the Open Banking Group, right, is a customer of ours, and so we talked about GDPR, but we haven't talked about, and we don't have time to, but open everything is about to be the new thing, right? So which just seems completely contrarian to securing and locking things down, right? But in the Open Banking Group's place, they had an API where you could send nightly batch jobs, and you were supposed to just send the Delta file, right, to this API. Well, this one company just kept appending to the Delta file, one of their partners. And so all of a sudden, they're seeing this large file come through, right? But they weren't noticing it. What they were noticing originally was a CPU spike and a memory spike on the machine trying to process this large file when the API was called. And then what we ended up seeing on our side using AI was, wow, the request response is never this big for anybody else, right? This API is doing some kind of data, we flagged it like a data exfiltration or system takeover attack, right, with our product. And so it wasn't really anything at all bad, but just using tools like that to help you find these things that are out of place, I guess, right? And there's a lot of that you can do now with AI for a variety of different things, right? And so try to take humans out of it and use some machine power where you can to do some things that might be one way. I think just slowing down and vetting your partners and making sure that things you expose to them are exposed properly, not doing the landmark white thing and just putting an API just kind of publicly available out there because they were in a hurry to get it out to market. It was the developer's thing. He was like, I was told I had to have this done before I went home today.
There are some products that you can also take a look at. There's a product called Cyber Clarity 360, Cyber Detector. You can take a look at it, and then you can also go ahead and evaluate for yourself whether Cyber Detector and Cyber Clarity 360 combined could give you that kind of an exposure. Yeah?
I think the question you still have to ask is, you're trusting your data to someone.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable?
Yep.
And if you're not, you won't give your money to anybody. So if you start applying similar thinking in your approach, I think you'll get to a slightly different answer.
Yes, mostly during the initial phase of the engaging of the project rather than later in the phase. So that's why it's very important to iron out things. I know we are normally rushing towards the end of the project and what normally happens is the due diligence part of thing, which is supposed to be in the front side of the initial stage, that gets missed out. So, it's asking the right questions and probably even asking for evidence that they have the controls that they're actually promising you today. So just asking that question.
So we got time for one more question over there.
So I think what you just said is actually a really interesting segue to where what I wanted to ask you. Everything that I'm hearing and what we're talking about, completely valid for today. But I'm curious, for those of us that may be parents of teenagers and younger, how do you see this kind of evolving for a generation that is essentially growing up without this concept of real privacy, where they live on Instagram and put things out on Snapchat and sort of have that concept of everything being open, and yet we know that they need to be secure as well. So I'm curious how you see this space sort of changing as they grow up and start to enter into the marketplace.
I have a very long-winded answer for that, because it's amazing, Esther. And first of all, I'm glad that I'm not growing up in this age and stage, because all the things that happened during my high school, if they were all available to everybody, gosh, I would never be able to live with myself. So hats off to this generation to just go ahead and have. But I can go ahead and tell you that there are a lot of awareness that is now being provided to the high school students as well on their safety and security, and especially on social media, because as they are seeing the results of it, we help monitor a couple of school districts to protect them from all the drug use and the violence. And we are seeing that the more training that we give, more awareness that we give to the younger generation, the better it is. How it is going to evolve, I can go into the depths of what are the processes that we are handling, but I'm not sure if Prateek would let me. That's why I was just saying that.
I think it's a great drink conversation.
Yeah, drink conversation. Yes.
Yeah, I just think the one thing I'll think is, I think one-time use credit card numbers and things are going to have to become the norm, right? I mean, every time, I travel all over the globe all the time, and it seems like I have to swap out the credit card I use for Ping work like 3 times a year, because somebody's buying dirt bikes, and I went to Lisbon in January, and somebody was buying dirt bikes, and I literally went to the conference, I went to 2 restaurants, and I went to the hotel, the Marriott in Lisbon. Like, I used my credit card in 3 places, right? And somehow somebody in Lisbon's buying motorbikes the week after, right? Like, so I think you're gonna have to, there's gonna be things like that, because you can just assume that everybody knows everybody's credit card number, right?
Yep.
I mean, you don't have to go in my pocket to get my credit card number. You're gonna find it on the dark web. So, so I think things like that are gonna be one-time use. And
I can find your credit card.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah, as a father of 3 daughters, let me tell you, the credit card never seems to get time off.
I second that. I second that.
But yeah, no, I think it's things like that are going to have to end up happening, these one-time UC type throwaway things, because everybody just kind of, it's just the data's out there, right? So you can, or the security questions have to change. It can't be your first car, your favorite dog and color, because somebody's just going to go on your Facebook or Twitter or whatever, Instagram, whatever they use now, right? And find it, right? So, yeah, the social engineering thing is just so easy to do now.
All right, let's give our moderator and panelists a round of applause. And at this time, if you would like to drink